They called me fearless, a man of fire, but no one saw the nights I trembled alone in the wilderness, the man who stood for God when the world turned its back. Fire fell from heaven and the crowd fell silent, yet it was not the spectacle that changed hearts. It was the whisper, the still small voice that taught me what it truly means to trust God. My name is Elijah, and this is my story.
Welcome to Testament Unspoken, where we bring biblical stories to life through the eyes of those who lived them. Each episode offers a raw, first-person perspective on some of the most powerful figures in Scripture, told with emotion, honesty, and depth. Please subscribe for more stories like this.
I am Elijah, a man of God, chosen to speak His truth when the world had turned its back. People call me bold, fiery, fearless. But they do not see what I see in the quiet of the night. They do not know the nights I trembled alone in the wilderness when the wind whispered threats and the darkness pressed close. They do not know the hours I fell to my knees, questioning my purpose, wondering if I was enough, wondering if God had abandoned me. I have stood before kings, before crowds of men and false prophets, proclaiming His word without hesitation, and yet I have also walked through fear. I have stared into the abyss of my own weakness, trembling at the thought of what obedience would demand. I have known hunger that gnaws the soul, loneliness that pierces deeper than any sword, and a heart that sometimes ached for courage I could not find. Yet in all of this, I have learned something the world rarely understands. To be a servant of God is not to be fearless in every moment. It is to stand, to speak, and to act, even when fear is present. Even when doubt creeps in, even when the night seems endless. Faith is forged not in comfort, but in the fire of trial. And it is there, in that fire, that I have come to know His power, His mercy, and the truth that I am never truly alone. Elijah the Tishbite said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." 1 Kings 17:1. I followed God's word into a land I had never known, to a widow on the edge of survival. Her home was small, her pantry almost empty, yet she obeyed the command I brought from the Lord. She gave me food and water, not knowing if there would be enough for herself or her son. In her willingness to trust, I saw the power of obedience. God provided, not just for me, but for her as well. The flour did not run out. The oil did not fail. In that moment, I realized that faith is never safe. Faith is stepping into the unknown, acting when the outcome is uncertain, trusting when the world offers no guarantee. Bible quote, "The jar of flour shall not be spent, neither shall the jug of oil fail." 1 Kings 17:14. It is in these moments of risk, these acts of courage born from hope, that God shows His provision. The widow's hands, outstretched in simple obedience, taught me more about the heart of God than any mountain or miracle. And I understood, sometimes to serve, to obey, is to walk into what seems impossible, and to see the impossible become real. The king, the people, they had forgotten God. Their hearts were consumed with the flames of Baal, chasing after idols carved by human hands, hollow and powerless. Temples filled with false gods, the cries of devotion turned to emptiness. And in that land of spiritual decay, I stood alone. I felt fear, the kind that grips the chest and makes the night darker, the kind that whispers, "Turn back, hide, stay silent." Yet alongside that fear, there burned something stronger, a fire within me, not mine, but His. The fire of the Lord, alive and restless, calling me forward, urging me to speak the truth when no one would listen. Bible quote, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow Him. But if Baal, then follow him." 1 Kings 18:21. It was a fire that would not allow compromise, a fire that demanded courage beyond my own. Every step I took toward confrontation was a battle between trembling human flesh and divine conviction. And I realized then that to obey God is not always to walk the easy path. It is to stand when the world stands against you, to speak when voices of fear and doubt surround you, to be His instrument, even if the odds are stacked and the flame of hope seems small. They mocked me, jeered at my words, laughed at my warnings. Their voices were loud, filled with pride and scorn, daring me to prove that my God was real. I could feel the weight of their doubt pressing in, the crowd's expectation like a storm around me. Every insult, every sneer was a test, not of God, but of my willingness to obey, to stand even when the world seemed to rise against me. And yet, I knew in my heart, God's power cannot be silenced by the arrogance of men. It does not bend to human opinion, nor tremble before ridicule. So I called upon him, not with my strength, not with my cleverness, but with faith, trembling yet determined. And then it happened. The fire came, not from my hand, not from my effort, but from him alone. Flames leapt from the heavens, consuming the offering, the wood, the stones, and even the water surrounding the altar. The crowd froze, eyes wide, mouths agape. Silence fell heavier than the desert sun. In that moment, I understood. The Lord's voice is heard not through the absence of fear, but through the obedience of those willing to stand for him, even when every doubt and jeer threatens to overwhelm them. Bible quotes, "The fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water in the trench." 1 Kings 18:38. Yet even after the fire fell and the altar stood ablaze, fear found me. Jezebel's threats cut through the victory like a shadow across the sun. Her fury was relentless, and the knowledge that my life hung by a thread pressed upon my heart. I fled into the wilderness, leaving behind the people, the crowds, the altar that had burned so brightly, and even the moment of triumph felt distant. Alone among the rocks and sparse trees, I wandered, weary in body and spirit. The wind whispered through the dry branches, the sun beat down without mercy, and the solitude pressed heavily on my soul. I sank beneath a broom tree, the rough bark pressing into my back, and I prayed with trembling hands and a heavy heart. My voice shook with questions. Had I failed? Had my obedience meant nothing? Was I truly alone in this fight for God's honor? I wept. I slept in short, restless moments. I wrestled with doubt and fear, with despair and the weight of my zeal. And in that lonely moment, I spoke to God with honesty, raw and unguarded. Bible quotes, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, but the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, and I alone am left." 1 Kings 19:10. Even the man who stood before kings, who called down fire from heaven, could be broken. And yet, even in my weakness, the Lord's presence lingered, unseen but undeniable, waiting to remind me that obedience is not measured by triumph alone, but by faithfulness through the shadow of fear. I expected the earth to shake. I expected fire to rain from the heavens. I expected a display so fierce it would strike fear into my heart and the hearts of those around me. I had called down fire from heaven before, and yet, here in the wilderness, God chose a different way. I stood upon the mountaintop, wind tearing at my robes, clouds swirling like tempests. The roar of nature came first, a great and strong wind, then the trembling of the earth, and then fire. But in all of it, the Lord was not there. My anticipation turned to confusion. Where was the power I sought, the spectacle I had imagined? And then, in the silence, in the quiet after the storm, a whisper brushed past my ear. Gentle, subtle, so soft that I almost doubted I had heard it. Yet it spoke with authority, with clarity, with an unmistakable presence that filled the hollows of my fear and weariness. In that still small voice, I felt the truth. Strength is not always in the dramatic, in the overwhelming, in the fire and the wind. Obedience is not always measured by spectacle, even in fear, even when the path is unclear, even when my own heart trembles. Faithfulness, rooted in trust, carries a power far beyond what the eyes can see. God's whisper reminded me that His ways are higher, His plans unseen, and His strength manifests quietly, patiently, in ways that often surprise the human heart. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire. But the Lord was not in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. 1 Kings 19:11-12. I expected thunder, I expected fire. A display so grand, so mighty, that the earth itself would tremble at God's power. I had seen fire fall from heaven. I had confronted kings and prophets. I had called upon the Lord in boldness. But here, in the solitude of the wilderness, I learned that His ways are not always as I imagine. I stood alone on the mountaintop. The wind howled around me, ripping at my cloak. Clouds twisted like serpents, lightning split the sky, and the ground shook beneath my feet. Fire danced on the rocks, but the Lord was not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. My heart pounded. I had expected spectacle, yet I found silence. And then, a whisper, soft, subtle, barely more than a breath, but it carried more weight than all the storms of the world. It was a voice that penetrated my fear, my doubt, my exhaustion. In that small, quiet voice, I felt His presence more strongly than in any blaze or roar. I understood finally that strength is not always in the dramatic, in power on display. Obedience rooted in trust, even when the path is unclear, even when the heart trembles, carries a power that cannot be measured by human eyes. God was teaching me, courage does not always roar. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it follows. Sometimes it waits in silence and moves in ways that are imperceptible, yet perfect. God restored my courage. He breathed life into the parts of me that had withered under fear, doubt, and exhaustion. I rose from the wilderness, not as a man seeking recognition, not as one trying to prove his strength, but as one fully surrendered, my heart open, my purpose clear. I returned to the people knowing that my task was not to show off God's power for applause or admiration. I came to speak truth, to guide, to call them back to the one true God, not through pride, but through humility. Every word, every act of courage now flowed from obedience, not ego. Bible quote, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus." 1 Kings 19:15. I realized then that the Lord's plan is far greater than my fears, far stronger than my doubts, and far beyond the limits of any human heart. It does not depend on human strength or brilliance. Even when I stumble, even when I shrink from the path, God's work continues. And in that truth, I found a courage deeper than fire, a confidence steadier than storms, a peace stronger than any anxiety that had gripped me before. Faith, I learned, is not about never being afraid. It is about walking forward even when fear surrounds you, trusting that every step is within God's perfect plan. Bible quote, "Go, present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land." 1 Kings 18:1, showing that God restored Elijah not just for himself, but to continue his work. My life is a story of fire and whisper, of moments that shook the heavens and moments that trembled in silence. It is a story of boldness, when I stood alone against a nation blinded by idols, and of fear, when I fled into the wilderness, worn and weary, uncertain if I had failed. It is a story of triumph, when the fire of God fell upon the altar, and of quiet obedience, when I learned that strength is not always in display, but in listening, waiting, and trusting. The Lord does not work only through spectacle or awe. He moves in hearts that are willing to obey, in lives that are willing to surrender. My mission is not measured by grand gestures alone, but by faith lived day by day, moment by moment. I am Elijah, a man called by God, chosen to speak His truth, and though centuries may pass, His work continues through every act of trust, courage, and obedience.
If you found meaning in these stories, don't forget to share them with others and subscribe to the channel. Your support is highly appreciated. Thank you. Hit the notification button.